Welcome to video 24 in series 3, and in this video I'll show you a convenient way to spawn the enemies. So what I'm going to do is to have a spawner that just spawns a bunch of enemies within a certain radius. Currently I have the evil cube in the scene, and I could set them up in the scene, but that's not what I want, because later I'm going to have, using the trigger, an event will happen and then many spawners will spawn enemies, and that's what I'm after. So I don't want them in the scene to begin with, so I'm going to turn the evil cube into a prefab. Okay, and then I'm going to make a new game object. So I'll just create an empty. I'm going to position it somewhere, so perhaps like right here, behind the wall, like that, and I'm going to call it enemy spawn. Okay. And then I'm going to make a new script, and I'm going to call this spawner. And I'll just attach the script to this game object and open it up. Alright, and as usual, I'll change my line ending and put in the namespace. Alright, and I'm going to use a certain, I guess, a certain method here that Unity has called inside unit sphere. It's quite handy. Well, what it'll allow me to do is to generate a random position within a certain radius of the spawner, and then I'm going to instantiate the enemy at that randomly selected position. Okay? So my spawner will have a number of enemies to spawn. So I'll make a public int, an integer, number of enemies. Okay, and I'll set that in the inspector. And then I'll have another one, private float spawn radius. Yeah, that makes sense. Spawn radius, say 5 units. Okay, and then I'll just figure it out as I go along. I'll make a new method here, void spawn object. Oh, and of course I need a public game object, not that, public game object, object to spawn. Okay, and I'll slot that in the inspector. That's going to be the enemy. So coming back here, what I'm going to say, I'm going to iterate through the number of enemies. So for each enemy, I'm going to create a spawn position and then spawn them at that randomly selected position. So I'm thinking I'll also need a private vector 3 spawn position, and I'll set this in this function. I'm going to use a for loop. So for int I starting from 0, I is equal to 0. So for loop, you start with any old integer, you just make this up, and you say I'm going to start from 0. You can start from any number, and then you're going to say, and it's going to keep on going while I is less than number of enemies. So this is what it's going to count up to, and I plus plus. So it means that I is going to be added, it's going to have 1 added to it each time the for loop runs. So just to recap, since I explained that terribly, what is going to happen? A for loop, I start with this number I made up, it's called I, you could call it anything, and I said I is going to start at 0. I want I to keep on incrementing until it is less than, so long as it's less than number of enemies. Once it is equal to number of enemies, and this happens each time the for loop runs, it gets incremented by 1. Once it is equal to number of enemies, the contents of the for loop will not execute, and it'll be complete. Okay, so I'm going to then create my spawn position, right? So spawn position is equal to transform.position plus that inside unit sphere stuff that you just saw right here. Okay. So I'll type there random.inside unit sphere times my spawn radius. Okay. So say for example the spawner is currently at this position here where it is, -11. It's 0 in the Y, -2 in Z. So when I run that method, a spawn position may get created. So this inside unit sphere, it's times 5, so I could end up having like an X of 2, a Y of 1, and a Z of say perhaps 3, and then that vector will then get added to the position. So I'll have basically a random position relative to the center. So relative to this enemy spawn. And so for each enemy that I'm going to instantiate, I'll generate a new spawn position and make use of that. So that's what I'm doing here. Alright, so once I've got that done, I need to instantiate the enemy. So I'll then say instantiate object to spawn. Object to spawn, there we go. And where am I going to do that? I'm going to do it at the spawn position. Now I don't need to worry about if the object is a bit above the ground or a bit too below the ground, because this enemy has a nav mesh component on it. It'll get slotted onto the nav mesh. It'll get planted onto the nav mesh. It takes care of that for me. Now if you were instantiating objects that you didn't want to fall through the floor accidentally, then you would, for example, have to do the following. You'd have to say then that spawn position, you would capture this in another vector. So I'd create a new vector 3 here. I'd say vector 3 adjusted position is equal to new vector 3, and then the x, for example, is spawn position dot x. Then this is where I don't want it to fall below the floor, so I might give it a position, a hard-coded position of 1. Then I'll say spawn position dot z, and then this is my adjusted position, and then I would instantiate the object at that adjusted position. Right? So I prevent it from, for example, falling through the floor. All of them will be spawned at the same height, but I'm not doing that, so I don't need to do that. And I don't have to worry about that. So I'll just say instantiate object spawn position at that position, and just a quaternion dot identity. So no particular rotation except for just the default one. Okay, so now that I've done that, I need to call this. So I will call it in the start method. So I'll just say spawn object. Alright. And probably I can use it. I might just comment out the update method. I don't think I will need it. And if all is well, this should work. Now I need to put in my prefab, evil cube, and I need to say how many I need. Let me just try, say, 5 to begin with, and let me delete evil cube from the scene, so I don't need this one anymore. Alright, now I'll just make this a little bigger. Hit play. Let's see what happens. Oh, perfect. Did you see that in the top window? There are 5 enemies. They all spawned perfectly. Fantastic. And how about I blow them up? Yep, let me just, sorry for that, let me go to the maximize. So there, my cursor is locked. Bam. Alright. Okay, so that worked nicely. Of course, I can increase that to more enemies. For example, if I put 10, and then I hit play, you'll see in the top there that all of a sudden there are lots and lots and lots of enemies. And of course, I can blow them up as well, just the same. Now, this is gonna get a little ugly, don't you think? Like, I have so many enemies. What happens to them, you know, when you destroy them? Well, yes, I should be removing them from the scene because each one there is just taking up resources. So what I should really do is go back to my script, my grenade explosion script, and I should say that when this object is hit, I should say that if it's an enemy, if I know it's an enemy object, I should destroy it after some period of time. So how can I know whether it's an enemy? Let me go to my prefab. Did I mark it as an enemy? No, it is untagged. So how about I give it the enemy tag? Okay, that's good. And let me go back to the script, and I'll say that if, so you remember this is the explosion work method, and I'm going to say if hit collider dot tag, or rather dot compare tag, and what's the name of that tag? It's enemy. Then let me just think about that. Yep, and I need another bracket. There we go. If the hit collider, what was hit by the overlap sphere from the explosion, if it was an enemy, then in that case I should destroy it. So destroy a hit collider dot game object, and after a certain duration, I should make a new variable here. Really, I should put in a private float destroy time and say that's like, for example, 7 seconds. Okay, and just put in here destroy time. Okay, now the best thing for me to do is to just go and try that out. Alright, hit play, jump back in. Okay. Oh, whoops. Do you remember that I had another script that actually deactivates the enemies? So there you go. When I start, all the enemies are deactivated. It's because anything with a tag of enemy that happens. So what I should do is to get rid of this script here called find enemies. So I should get rid of that now on wherever it's attached, because what it does is it goes through, it finds every game object with the tag enemy and then deactivates it. Alright, so jumping back in, pretty much, let's have a look through it. My trigger, yeah, and I had attached it to the player, so I'll just get rid of the script here. Alright, that takes care of that bug. And now if I hit run, okay, all the enemies are there. And if I blast them, then after 7 seconds, they'll be gone. So I just have to wait for a moment. And there you go. Okay, so they're all destroyed after a bit of time. Alright, so that was it for this video. You saw how to spawn enemies in a convenient way. So now in the next video, I need to show you how to use events. Because what I want to do is to have like spawners, like many spawners, but they don't spawn the enemy until something happens, until a certain trigger happens. And I don't want to have that trigger, going and accessing each enemy spawn and then telling it to spawn. That's really inconvenient and a bit slow. It's better if I just have an event that takes care of that for me. So we'll see that in the next video. Alright, thanks for watching and see you then.